can. So I'm very excited to be joined today by representatives from ourselves at Cloudsmith and also from two other organizations, BuildKite and Acquia. So this is the perfect time for me to bring our guests onto the stage. So hi, everybody.
Hello.
So yes, joining us today, we have Alison Sekelka, VP of Product at Cloudsmith, Sam Cochran, Principal Engineer at BuildKite, and Chris Hughes, CISO and co-founder at Acquia. So I'm glad to see everybody has joined. I just wanted to say originally, Mel Kalfas from BuildKite was scheduled to join us, but unfortunately she's sick. So we wish her a very, very speedy recovery indeed. And hopefully she can join us for another webinar in the future. However, Sam has graciously agreed to step in. So thank you very much indeed, Sam. Really appreciate that. So if I could just ask everybody just to give a quick introduction about yourselves and your organizations, that would be great. I'll randomly choose somebody to kick things off. So let's start with Chris.
Yeah, I'll jump in first. Chris Hughes here, CISO and co-founder at a company named Acquia. We're a cybersecurity services company working in the U.S. with public sector and Department of Defense agencies, as well as commercial companies. But before that, I've been in the sector, in cyber, I should say, for about 15 plus years. Started off in the military, have been a federal employee with a couple different agencies doing cloud and DevSecOps and cybersecurity. And yeah, just happy to be here and chat with you all.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Chris. Alison, I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Alison Sekelka. I work at Cloudsmith. You got to watch a wonderful introductory video of my that organization before the webinar started. But Cloudsmith's universal artifact management solution. So one place to centralize all your software artifacts that you use throughout your software supply chain.
You said that so much better than I could have, Alison, to be honest. So thanks very much. And finally, last but not least, Sam, please.
Hi, good morning from Melbourne, Australia. I'm Sam. I'm a principal engineer at BuildKite. I've been here nearly the whole journey and in various bits and pieces. We started off as a CI/CD provider. We have a tool for creating CI/CD pipelines, and we're working on some new products, including things like test analytics, visibility into your test suite, the hidden application of what you're building.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sam. I'm a big fan. Actually, I wrote a lot of the documentation at Cloudsmith for using Cloudsmith and BuildKite, so found it great. So yes.
Thank you. Well, I've read some of that documentation. It's fantastic.
Oh, brilliant. Awesome. I'll meet up with you and thank you in person for that at some point. But yes. Well, look, thank you, everyone. Those introductions are very helpful. So look, I know time is short, so let's just jump in with the first topic. I'll just throw this one out there for the floor to sort of whoever wants to pick it up first can go. I'll probably pick these at random as well, but let's start with the one I mentioned earlier. So coming into 2023, I think that we are finding, and certainly the discussions that I have with some of our users at Cloudsmith, is that there is a drive to reduce toolchain complexity. So there's multiple reasons for this, but I just wanted to sort of take the temperature of the room and get feelings on that. So yes, reducing toolchain complexity in 2023. I'd like to start with that. Who wants to go first on that one?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I'll say I definitely agree with that. Leading and working with various teams in DevSecOps environments, we're looking to shift security left and bring all these great capabilities around SAST and DAST and SCA and secret scanning and SBOM and so on. But it becomes quite a bit to manage, especially if you have disparate tooling in that tool chain and everything is producing findings in different formats and schemas and so on. So bringing all that together in terms of tooling and output and artifacts is really important, and it's causing a lot of cognitive overload on security teams. So I definitely think it's going to be a key area.
Yeah, I would second that. For Cloudsmith, when we talk to our customers, they're really interested in being able to centralize how they're managing those software artifacts. And not to jump ahead to some of the other topics that we have, but part of that's trying to figure out how to do more with less in 2023 and really streamline your operations. And so I think there's a cost pressure and a bandwidth pressure to also streamline that tool chain and reduce complexity and that cognitive overload for your DevOps teams.
The prolific number of products on the market, I think, embody a lot of this. It's I went to KubeCon last year, And it was interesting seeing a physical expression of the CNCF landscape in all of the booths around me. Like it gets a bit overwhelming, the idea of the number of products, the number of things you have to care about. There's this Cambrian explosion of tools and capabilities and things to worry about during software development. And how can we help teams not have to worry about so many of those things, like to pull the abstraction layer of where you're providing value up higher.
Yeah, actually, Sam, I too was at KubeCon last year. KubeCon in Detroit, was that? Yeah.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
I was amazed at the number of booths. And I think some of that is being away from in-person conferences for quite a while. But I was stunned. And certainly in my role as a technical account manager, I spend a lot of time talking to users, customers of Cloudsmith. And there is definitely an overwhelming drive to streamline things, to work more efficiently, and also, of course, I mean, to reduce total cost of ownership. It's a big concern. The landscape's always shifting, but it's definitely a thread that I find increasingly across more and more conversations that I have now is things have got a little bit unwieldy and people want to work more efficiently. And look, even internally, we've done the same in Cloudsmith. So we have slimmed down tool chains and tried to work smarter with better tools rather than a larger amount.
I think some of that's very interesting, like the way everyone runs applications in containers or some sort of nobody cares about hosts anymore. Like that
No.
abstraction layer has been dragged up, right? And I feel like the same is going to come through in DevOps and dev tool chains. It's people are going to care less about where things are run or how they're run, or they don't want to understand the interoperation of each of the tools within a tool chain or a pipeline. They're more interested in seeing the value out of that thing at the layer above. And so I think this idea of simplifying the offerings that we have and capabilities that we have, it's got to be the thing this year, I reckon.
Absolutely. Well, actually, Chris, this is probably a good thing to float to you. So, I mean, just before I started this webinar, I came off a call with another user, and their big focus, is getting away from managing their sort of on-prem instances, getting away from hosts, getting away from applications that they are running in-house and managing themselves. So they're very much looking sort of cloud native transformations for lots of their tool chain. And I think that very much plays into this topic. They're looking to consolidate, but also to not have to, well, own isn't the right word. It's still their tool, but just not have that management and cognitive and operational overhead. And I know, Chris, cloud native application development is sort of one of your fortes. So you must hear similar to this quite a bit.
Yeah, when we've seen quite a push where I am in the United States with both federal agents, Department of Defense, and the commercial sectors in terms of cloud adoption. And it's for the reasons you're talking about. Is organizations are increasingly realizing that managing underlying compute and networking and hosting and so on is not their core competency. They want to focus on their core competency, which is delivering value to their stakeholders and business customers, for example. And that's kind of the allure of the cloud native paradigm and the shared responsibility model, for example. As they can lean into those cloud service providers, whether you're talking IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS, and you kind of offload some of that responsibility, that administrative overhead, and so on to the CSP, which is a major improvement in terms of the burden and overhead that they have to manage on their end.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Alison, any final thoughts on that topic just before because I know we're going to revisit this when we talk about reducing tool chain complexity. We maybe won't, but anyway.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting the point Chris made there about organizations wanting to focus on their core competencies. We're just reaching the end of January, and I've heard that from several customers already this year, that as they're looking at reducing that tool chain complexity, a big part of that is they want to make sure that everything that their developers are doing is value add to what their company is trying to accomplish. And they don't want those engineers being system admins or spending time maintaining systems or processes that don't ultimately benefit those organizations or contribute to their core competency. And I actually think that is sort of interesting as you lead into the platform engineering side of the conversation too. Some of that's in that same space of saying, we want to make sure that our developers, that their time and energy is focused on advancing our business and our core competencies.
Yeah, Absolutely. I noticed an interesting comment in the chat just from Neil that cloud hosting takes a lot of us admins' plates, quicker to change instances with less downtime. I totally agree with that. As someone who, in a former role, was an old school sysadmin with on premise servers and racks and things like that, to watch the evolution to where we are now it's fascinating. Actually, I know it's not a role that I do anymore, but I actually agree with Neil there that it frees up frees people up to focus on core competencies. I think I said a line in a keynote talk a year or so ago that said, if it isn't, if the application that you're looking at isn't core to your own sort of product, if it's not something that you're going to sort of acquire and build in, then just buy it as a service. Don't try and build it yourself. Don't try and run it yourself in house, but just buy it as a service. And that was advice that I think is still standing today. So. Okay, awesome. Well, in that case then, let's just change it up a bit, because Alison, you mentioned something there that I would love to touch upon. So it's a little bit of a sort of side path here, but this is something that people said to me at KubeCon in Detroit. So I was seeing everywhere, platform engineering. Platform engineering was everywhere. I even got refused a ticket to a platform engineering party on one of the nights, which I was incredibly upset about. But basically, platform engineering versus DevOps. It's 2023. We're moving forward. So is platform engineering just an evolution of DevOps, right? Is it a rebranding of DevOps? So what do people think of that? So that's an interesting one, because I've read a little bit about this the last couple of days, and there seems to be all kinds of opinions on this. So I suppose I'll throw it to Sam just to kick us off for a bit of fun.
I was thinking about this over the past couple of days as well, because it's been thrown around a lot, but forming an actual opinion, because you can call it any way you want to call about it, right? But to me, it's I think you still sort of practice DevOps on a platform, right? Like it feels to me like it's about shifting that bar up, shifting up that abstraction layer. So you see tools like Spotify introducing stuff like Backstage and providing centralized places for developers to go and use standard patterns. Means that there's less complexity in the toolchain because it's already chosen for you, and
right.
The security can be pre-vetted. Like you can have a set of tools that is known to be up to date and to not have the right vulnerability checking in place and all those sorts of things. So, like if you can engineer a platform that is safe for developers to then go and build your core business value on top of and share as much of it as possible, like that feels like the inflection. It's dragging that abstraction layer up, letting your developers focus on the thing that's actually valuable, being sure that you've got good security story and all the right pieces in place below as a centralized effort. And then like how much of that can you get away with not having to do yourself? Like how much of platform engineering can you find great tools, hopefully like the ones that we're talking about here, to plug in there and provide that value and know that it's secure and by default and all those things.
Absolutely. To be honest, I think it was a bit of an unfair question to just throw at you like that. I do now, and I'll put my hand up and admit that. It was a little bit of an unfair question because it is like you said it. It is like you said it. I wonder, Chris, any thoughts on that before I pose my little twist on that question, I suppose?
No, I actually like his take on it a lot. I think you opened up a can of worms. I've seen like a lot of heated debate of, is this the new age of DevOps, or is it, different than DevOps? And I think they're complementary, in the sense that it's a new form of engineering, and it leverages a lot of DevOps methodologies and practices, for example. And we talked about, how cloud can abstract things for customers. We're seeing the same thing with platform engineering. They're trying to do that internally for the development teams, is abstract a lot of that administrative overhead and nuance away, bake in security guardrails, compliance requirements, things like that. So it's very complementary, in my opinion.
Okay. I actually really like that. I really like that. I see comments in the chat. Jonathan says that platform engineering seems more encompassing. That's an interesting take on it. And I'd like to think about that one before I comment on that. I suppose here's something just for the wider group. And Alison, I know you didn't get to comment on that. Maybe you can comment on this. It sort of ties into what you said, Sam. Do you think that platform engineering kind of has some ties to like platform as a service? you mentioned about giving a common tool stack for developers where you can bake in security, you can bake in sort of best practices and things like that. Maybe not in the terms of the platform as a service that we know and love, like we've all used it, I suppose, at some point, but maybe sort of almost like an internal take on that. Does that sound like, does that resonate? What do you think about that, Alison? Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, I think it resonates, and I'd build on what Sam and Chris were saying. It ultimately feels like an evolution of DevOps. I also think it's really easy to blanket say what DevOps is or isn't, but really,
Yeah.
each organization, it's a little different, and each organization's on their own journey to embracing DevOps. Platform engineering seems like an evolution for folks who are a little more further on that DevOps journey, and whose software architecture might be getting more complex and harder for the development teams to be able to manage, or want to manage some of that infrastructure side of the house too. And so, platform engineering is really just an evolution of DevOps, and also basically saying, how can we make sure that our developers are doing the thing that is within their wheelhouse and matches their expertise, and they don't have to become an expert on the full stack and all the tool sets that's being used there.
I think that's absolutely true. So I was going to just say, but you said it already, that and one of the comments in the chat actually is that DevOps just keeps improving, and that's completely true. I mean, as far as I remember the first time I saw DevOps being sort of thrown around as a phrase. It was really just developers automating their build and deployment pipelines at the very start, basically, and then it expanded out and it started encompassing these bigger, more complex tool chains. And there's so much more going on that it needs to become bigger and more all-encompassing, as was said earlier in the chat as well. So I don't know. Everybody has an opinion. I suppose we're all entitled to them. But that was. It seems to me that is kind of what platform engineering edges towards. I have no doubt that when I get off this webinar, I will be inundated with people to tell me that I'm absolutely wrong, and that it isn't that, and it's something else entirely. But that's what makes it. That's what makes it interesting, right? And it sort of happened at the same with DevOps at the start as well. So, I suppose to spin this in another direction, and maybe this is relevant to both toolchain complexity and that platform engineering evolution versus whatever way you want to phrase that. The rise of distributed engineering teams, and maybe not just engineering teams, right? Maybe just the rise of distributed DevSecOps teams, or development teams in general. What does that mean when we think of the tool chains that we're used to, the way that we build sort of applications and internal pipelines and things like that? Obviously, and we've spoke about this at length now for over a year, more than that, because distributed working really obviously accelerated, and we're all very well used to that now. But I think we've all had the time to evaluate the changes that we've had to make to accommodate that. Maybe some of those changes were by choice, maybe some of them were sort of enforced. But what do we think that rise in distributed engineering teams what kind of impact has that had on tool chains and complexity and experience? Who wants to volunteer to start that one?
I'll jump in there first again, I guess. From my perspective, I always think of it from the security perspective very often. So, I think that the distributed working situation in terms of tool chains has the biggest impact when you think about access control, how people are navigating into the environment, accessing those tool chains, and, the permissions associated with it, whether the device they're using is, a corporate-owned device or a BYOD, for example, and understanding the device they're coming from, where they're located at, device posture in terms of the posture of the device they're connecting from. I think those are all key considerations, especially when you think about software supply chain security, and you realize that malicious actors are increasingly targeting those build environments, those tool chains, to compromise downstream consumers of software. It's definitely a key area that organizations need to pay a lot of attention to.
Yeah, that's. I would agree with all of that, Chris. I would. Alison?
Yeah, I guess just building on that a little bit, for us, we see a lot of folks emphasizing the value of cloud native tools when they start to talk about those distributed teams too. So that ability to ensure availability, reliability, scalability of the platforms that your internal teams are using is really important as you're talking about having those engineering distributed across the globe. and it can really be a differentiator for customers who are able to leverage those cloud native solutions.
And Sam, taking BuildKite as an example, what's the sort of challenges that you've seen, both internally yourself accommodating other distributed members of BuildKite, and also obviously your user base is distributed, globally anyway. So what do you think there?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So BuildKite as a company, internally we've been remote first forever and have always been a distributed engineering team. So it's been interesting to be on the front of that. Yeah, I think just communicating, coordinating seems like the biggest challenge. Like being really effective as an organization. There, like we use a tool called Basecamp, but that's probably beyond scope here. I'm very interested in the securing the actual endpoint devices, how you access your production infrastructure, how you access all of the tools that we're talking about here. Like how do you access the platform securely if you are constructing your own platform and engineering it. So BuildKite is we have an interesting stance on this, I guess, because we are a hosted platform. We're only a hosted platform, but we don't run it in compute for actual CI/CD workloads. We leave that entirely to you and your own infrastructure. But what it means is that we secure the endpoint that most users are coming to interact with the system. We have a hosted platform, which has benefits here. Like if you're using hosted platforms, like I presume Cloudsmith might have an offering that's the same, then you're offloading a lot of that security story and like all of that stuff. You've got a trusted third party that has a hosted platform that's been through rigorous compliance requirements and all that stuff up front. And you don't have to worry about it. You can focus on your core competency. But for us, like then letting you run the compute also means that, for example, BuildKite can't see source code. It doesn't have to interact with those tools that might be on your side of the boundary, within your fence. And so you can have the strong security story where it's there, where it's valuable around your IP and around whatever you might be doing within that platform itself. So it's just interesting. I think different people explore this in different ways. But yeah, it's as we mentioned, like the complexity around this stuff seems to be ever increasing, and I think people are wanting to own less of the story, if possible. And so having done this hybrid model for a long time, sort of starting to see more people try it out and do it in different ways, because it means you can trust someone else to do it securely and well, as long as security is built first into the product, like it always has been with BuildKite. It can be a good option.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not wrong, Sam. So Cloudsmith also is hosted only. So we are hosted only as well. We obviously are very, very focused on security. One thing that you mentioned there, which I thought was really interesting, is it also matters compliance and regulatory reasons. So, a lot of our users, they need to have a vendor that has, ISO 27001 certifications, SOC 2 certifications. And that goes a long way, towards that point of securing the platform. And that carries a lot of weight with those users. So we put a lot of stock into security. Obviously we do, we have to. But I think that's what people want. That's what people want their vendors to do. And with distributed teams, as Cloudsmith as well, we're remote first, same as BuildKite. That's where we all are, and we have both Cloudsmith team members all over the globe. Alison is in the States, and I'm in Belfast in Northern Ireland. So we do have to meet that challenge. And interestingly enough, one thing that you brought up, which I thought was interesting because we had a talk about this ourselves lately, is not just the tool chain, but communications. Communications is a bridge, is something that needs to be bridged properly with fully distributed engineering teams, fully distributed teams for that matter. Okay, so we are sort of chock full of communication tools, and we actually slimmed those down. So we now have less places where we collaborate and we communicate in Cloudsmith, because it was reducing the noise. It tends to do that. So of course we do a lot of calls and we do a lot of chat, but it's very much in the same vein of just reducing complexity in the tool chain. I know it's not a DevOps tool. I know chat is not like that, but it was a really core part of getting us to work together better. I thought so. Yeah, That's my
There's
thoughts.
probably more in that thread because our CEO Keith, who is one of the founders of BuildKite and built a lot of the early product, gave a great talk recently about storytelling in DevOps, which is about communicating, right? Like we sort of treat it as a thing that happens externally, like outside our tools, and then the tools are full of information, sometimes too much information that we can't, find the actual signal amongst the noise. But what if those tools helped us navigate them better and communicate with our colleagues about what we're seeing and actually tell the stories about what's in that data? I think there might be something there that we start seeing in 2023 as well, where the tools can help us. Like the tools are where our work lives. And so if we can talk about our work in the place where it lives, tell better stories in the place where it lives, visualize it in new ways, collaborate in new ways, that might be helpful too.
Mm-hmm. Alison, I think this is probably one of your more favorite topics.
Well, I mean, I've been working remote since 2019. So pre-pandemic, I was opting into this lifestyle. And I do think, it's interesting. A lot of DevOps is practice and philosophy and culture. And that's really what we're saying is that when you're a remote first organization, you have to define what those practices and culture is and how you can leverage that to get the best work and the best outcomes for your organization and your team. And so a little outside of DevOps, but I do think there's some overlap. And what Sam's saying there for us internally, I can speak a little less towards our engineering team, but within the product organization, making sure we're really intentional about leveraging tools like Notion or things like that and saying, this is where you go to find the information for what you're working on. And just helping build up that clear practice and standards for our organization really helps with that collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we're all trying to get better at, I think. So it's not exactly a prediction for DevOps in 2023, but it does impact DevOps in 2023. There's no doubt about that. I think anyway. So awesome. Okay, well, just to move things along, time always flies on these webinars. Time moves quicker than you think. So this is probably a big one, and I'm going to throw this one straight away to Chris because I know that this is in his wheelhouse, so to speak. But I think we'll all have something to say. So software bill of materials. This is not a new phrase. It's not something that we're just talking about for the first time now, but this may be the year that it really rises to prominence and takes on more importance for a lot of organizations and a lot of teams. So what can we do? How can we make SBOMs more actionable and useful in 2023? Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you. This is going to be the year or coming years, I should say, for SBOM. We saw a lot of traction, obviously, in the United States around cybersecurity executive order efforts with agencies like NTIA and now CISA around SBOM adoption and evangelism and tooling and things like that. And then, of course, even in the EU, in the Cyber Resiliency Act, if you take a look at that, it requires SBOMs for product manufacturers to, kind of extrapolate those components that are in those products. In terms of making them actionable, I think that's where things like vulnerability exploitability exchange, for folks that are familiar with that, is essentially going to bring kind of some signal to the noise of the SBOM. It's one thing to tell a developer, hey, you have 700 vulnerable components. It's another to tell them of those 700, 36 are exploitable, for example. So we talked about bringing signal to the noise and trying to drive down some of that complexity we talked about with infrastructure. We need to do the same thing when it comes to vulnerability management for developers. We don't want to add a lot of friction, impede their velocity, and let them focus on what's actually exploitable, what brings the most risk to the organization, and have them take action on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say a year ago, we were asking customers about SBOMs without a lot of response or engagement. And we're finally starting to see customers come to us and ask us about SBOMs and how they can leverage that tool to be more effective. I think it's, we were talking about where are SBOMs in the hype cycle. Feels like we're coming out of the trough of disillusionment and moving into the slope of enlightenment. I think a big piece of that is that it's not just about requiring these companies to have SBOMs, but it's actually helping them to get value from it. So like Chris was saying with Vex and other tools that actually make those SBOMs useful. So it's not just a requirement, but it actually solves a problem for those customers and actually becomes a value add for what they're trying to do within their organization.
Mm-hmm. Sam, any thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because everyone's tackling it in slightly different directions as well.
Yep.
Yeah, so like we've had a lot of customers displaying interest in provenance and attestations, as well as the actual SBOMs themselves, like being
Yes.
able to prove and do the compliance dance, making sure the policies are being enforced consistently. So how do you it still feels like SBOMs, there's no one standard, there's like a couple, and then how are people navigating those? How do you make it actionable? We've seen some great, like, seen lots of people creating different types of pipelines with different tools and different ways of making them actionable, raising those vulnerability alerts, pulling them into the place where the code is being written, like raising them as GitHub issues that can then be actioned with buttons, and like building those sorts of workflows themselves. Which it's interesting to see people building that stuff themselves to kind of mimic some of like GitHub's Dependabot stuff, but in a more formal and policy enforceable way. So like seeing the evolution of that and the standardization of that, like how are we going to see the standard ways of creating SBOMs and then signing and shipping those as part of the container manifests, and like watching these actually consolidate around a best practice way of doing things, and then turning them into something that developers don't have to implement themselves, but can just drop in. Like, for example, in Build Kite, looking at like what is the plugin that people are going to reach for and like drop into their pipeline, and it provides SBOM generation and makes sure that things are in packages and then enforces the policy at the end. Like those sorts of things, seeing the practices emerge and consolidate and then not having to be thought about will be interesting.
Yeah, I think
go ahead, Alison, please.
Yeah, sorry, Dan. I was just going to say, I think it's really interesting to see the open source solutions that are developing in this space. And basically we're saying, how can you secure your open source dependencies? And we're seeing solutions come out of that open source community to help answer that question. I think that's really interesting and fun to watch. I also think that, to some of what Sam's saying there, it gets really interesting at how you manage this at scale. So really, when you start to talk about trying to manage your software supply chain across your entire organization, how do you develop a developer experience and user experience around that makes it easy for teams to be able to implement and manage that as well?
We're back at pushing that DevOps problem into the platform engineering problem, right? Like you want a consumable component that people can develop and operate on, but don't have to like build the pieces and plumbing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the first step to adoption is to make things accessible and frictionless and easy. That's the way to win people over. But there's no doubt from my perspective, sort of in the front line. Yes, I agree with you, Alison. A year ago, when I was talking to users of Cloudsmith and customers of Cloudsmith, the landscape, especially around what they wanted from SBOMs and what they needed, was still quite foggy to them. They weren't very clear. Now, going into 2023, I'm hearing increasingly from those same users and customers that, yes, this is something that we know we need to get on top of. Like Chris said, I mean, there are standards coming down the line and there are requirements coming down the line. They are aware of that. They're maybe not quite there yet, but they're certainly very interested. And look, Sam, the same applies for, signing containers, in toto attestations. It's all in there and they're thinking about it all. But what they really want, and I think you said this, Chris, is they don't want, a wall of data about packages and dependencies and CVEs. What they want is actionable data. That they want the path forward there that's easily identifiable for them, that they can take direct concrete actions upon. So I think some people still feel a little bit overwhelmed by it at the moment, but it definitely feels like maybe by 2023 we won't have a perfect sort of solution at the end of this year, but it definitely feels like there'll be a lot of progress this year towards that solution. So watch this space. When we do our December webinar, none of these predictions will be true and I'll look like a fool, but it's still fun to think about that. But no, I definitely feel from talking on the front line with users of Cloudsmith as a product, and of course we're in package management, so artifacts and signatures and attestations, it's core to where we think the landscape is moving. I definitely hear that a lot more now than I did before.
There's an analogy with we made a change last year to when you come to a build. Firstly, in CI/CD, most people don't care if the build is green. If it's green, everything's fine, you move along. You probably
Yeah.
don't even come and look at it. If it's failing, you don't care about anything that passed in the build. You only care about the things that actually failed. Like, you want to make it actionable, right? It's the same principle. So we made some changes to really pull failures to the forefront and show them earlier and a few of these things. But I could see the same patterns with SBOMs, right? Like, if everything's okay, you just want your policy to be green. You don't even want to look at it. Like, your deploy just keeps going. But if it's red, like if there's a critical vulnerability in one of your dependencies, you just want to know about that bit and like make it actionable and give me a button or something, like make it as easy as possible.
That's it.
Seeing those patterns emerge. Like, we're already seeing some people do it. I think Kara Carey from Cloudsmith did a lovely presentation about using Sift and Gripe, I think, to
That's right, she did,
create an SBOM and then highlight the critical vulnerabilities and not care so much about the rest of it. So those open source tools, as Alison was mentioning, like they are already providing some of these insights and those actionable things. Seeing those become common patterns and becoming pieces that you can just drop in and use without thinking too hard about it. That's the interesting thing, I think.
Yeah, I really like the statement of "give me a button." So sort of, you mentioned earlier, sort of, almost make it as actionable as dependable. So nice and clear. Yeah, I think that's a very good point indeed. So, Chris, any final thoughts on that just before we sort of move on to the next one?
No, I think it's spot on in terms of make it easy, give me a button kind of thing. Is we're seeing a lot of innovation around tooling to help, show developers what is the problem, what dependency is of concern, and where are some alternatives, even in some cases, that they can explore to quickly remediate the situation and move on with the build and deployment process. So I think Sam was spot on.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, I know we only have a couple of minutes left, and I do need to announce the winners of our Cloudsmith prize packs. Of course, I think that's probably the highlight of the webinar for a lot of people. Certainly is for me, even though I don't actually get one. So I just like to announce the winners. But just very finally then, a couple of quick minutes before I do that, a nice topic for everybody. So 2023, what does prioritizing developer experience look like? So we've all heard user experience. I'm very familiar with that. I spend all my time with users. What are the top things we should be thinking about for prioritizing developer experience? And we're not allowed to use the same answer of just give me a button. That's too easy. So anything else that people think developers really want, just to make their lives easier, just the highline topics.
I think it's some of the things that we talked about here, helping them understand what's the tool set that I'm supposed to use to be effective in my job. How can I easily find the right information I need? That's where some things like Backstage are interesting. How can you make onboarding and ramping up as a developer at an organization really easy and seamless, and help them understand, where they can go to find information and documentation and solve their own problems.
Excellent.
I'll jump in real quick and also say, for anyone not watching the chat, check the chat. There's some amazing and some funny comments in there. So nonetheless, I think another thing we'll see a lot of attention for is, trying to bring governance, risk, and compliance and policy into codified formats. So instead of, asking for mounds of digital-based paper documentation, starting to bring some policy as code, compliance as code, and things like that into the pipeline, into our processes of how we deploy software, for example. I think it'll be another area that's going to see a lot of attention.
Awesome. I suppose just very quickly for myself then, developer experience, just even internally in Cloudsmith, a shout out to the Cloudsmith engineering team who did a great job in improving that onboarding experience, Alison, for new engineers at Cloudsmith. So we have a much better development environment now. It's not exactly click a button, but it's a lot more easy to spin up than previously, and easier to debug in. And I think the guys are all very proud of themselves, and rightly so. Even though I don't develop for Cloudsmith, I was very impressed when I saw it, and I thought that has got to make things easier for people onboarding and just getting started. So yes, and you're absolutely right about the chat as well, Chris. There, Hillary's hilarious. Pepsi Jet. I remember that advertisement. Yes, Pepsi points. Awesome. So yes, well, we've ran right up to the last minute, folks. We've hit our 45-minute mark. I think at this stage, I just need to thank you all for coming along and taking part. We could talk for longer. It was extremely interesting, even if I will be corrected on some of the things I said afterwards, but that's half of the fun. So yes, thank you very much, Sam. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you, Alison. It was a pleasure to chat with all of you. I hope we get an opportunity to do it again. And I'm already seeing in the chat who won. So the names that I have, while I turn my head to my other screen, 4 winners of the prize pack. First is Cody Wee Hunt, Neil Berkowitz, Waleed Malik, and Greg Thompson. Lucky folks. We've got some happy people in the chat already. So Hillary will look after you and get the prize packs out to you. So yes, everybody, thanks again. Just before I close, you can find us all in our respective places of work, and please come along and try out all our products. We would appreciate that a lot. But it was a pleasure, and I look forward to talking to you all again.
Thanks, Dan.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.